brothers and sisters, ladies and gentlemen, students and scholars, teachers and trainers, professors, professionals, the most honorable President Traditional Modi, respected ministers, managers, honorable doctors and directors, I DrRK from USA, heartily, cordially welcome all of you. It is really nice time, nice place, nice section that we are appreciating our holy Indian culture in the form of words, bottom to top, root to fruit, first to last. It has a great message of unity, oneness and equality. Our all spiritual starters, those who came in India, born in India, worked in India, they addressed about nature. Nature is the common concept of all worldly religions. Nature never defeat us, never betray us. Nature is always friendly and familiar, so let us be fearless and friendly with nature. It is said in all holy cultures, civilizations and spiritual holy books of our nation and abroad, what is nature? It is a common concept, but nobody knows what's the true meaning of nature. It was experienced by William Wordsworth and Ashley College when there was French Revolution in 1789. There was no peace, not the tranquility of heart. So everyone was running after collecting materialistic goods. Ultimately, there was revolution and there was not the peace of mind. How our soul can reunite with the super spiritual power of God? We learn this thing from nature. Nature is our teacher. Nature nurtures us like a mother. Nature treats us like a doctor. Nature teaches us like a teacher. Nature plays multidimensional, multi-sided, multifaceted roles. When we go against the nature and modern scientific technologies are overpowering on nature and nature is not being respected, welcomed and thanked, that's why nature is not becoming friendly and fearless with us. So we must follow the teachings of our holy saints, starters, beginners, initiators, creators, generators, operators, those who came on this land, spent their time with nature, how nature dealt with them. We never shall forget it. A man can never be alone if he is in nature. Because it is clearly written in our holy scriptures that our body is made by 5 elements: air, fire, soil, sky and water. And these 5 elements are composed in this human body, in everyone, in human body, in everyone, in every man, woman. We can observe the nature of these 5 elements: air, fire, soil, sky and water. This is the first observation of our mind, that we observe, that we feel, that we think, that we know. Secondly, openly, in the nature, atmospherically, all elements and objects are the pure form of nature, and we should always care this nature. That nature bless us, nature heal us, help us in all the critical times of our life. Dear friends, in the daytime we have the sun always with us in the form of nature. At the night time we have the moon with us in the form of nature, stars, the moon, sky. These are also the elements and objects of nature. They have their own family, and we should never feel alone and weird. We should always focus our target on achieving it. For that we must be regular, punctual, and unrelentingly, unceasingly, unstoppingly, we should try to go ahead. We should never stop anywhere without attaining salvation, without attaining the ultimate goal of life. It is said on all our holy scriptures of our holy land, our forefathers, freedom thinkers, freedom fighters, those who came in this world just for spending their time in humanity, they shared their joys, sorrows, food, clothing, shelter, and they addressed the message of affection, love, universal love, brotherhood. In the world, it is a great need today, where on the one hand, all the worldly nations are in controversies, fightings. At that time, our saints, freedom fighters, martyrdoms, sacrificial bodies, they address them for non-violence. The Indian Holy Land addressed them about non-violence and peace in the world. So it is the great treasure in the Indian culture, Indian civilization. So we proud only by being nationalistic and patriotistic person of our society. Our great men, forefathers, came to make us understand what's the true aim of life. How we learn different languages from the nature, and how our society develops by the nature of the language. Language is both a system of communication between individuals and a social phenomena. The area of language and society, social linguistics, is intended to show how our use of language is governed by such factors as class, gender, race, etc. A subsection of this area is anthropological linguistics, which is concerned with form and use of language in different cultures and to what extent the development of language has been influenced by cultural environments. The study of language and society, social linguistics, can be dated to about the middle of the 20th century. Before that, there were authors who commented on how language use was influenced or indeed guided by socially relevant factors such as class, profession, age, gender. Indeed, the father of modern linguistics, Ferdinand de Saussure, 1857 to 1913, saw language as a type of social behavior, and in this he reflected then sociological. Language means expression of our thoughts. Nature nurtures us, even teaches us different elements and aspects of nature. They communicate each other by their own language. They have their own language. They receive and send their message. But man's way of conversation is totally based upon learning. How we learn initially at the beginning stage of childhood, how our parents teach us, and how we learn, how birds, plants, trees teach their young ones. They learn from their parents. So it is also the part of nature. In the early 1960s, a number of linguists in America began to investigate English usage in the United States from a social point of view. Since then, there has been a flood of publications in this vein, primarily in America, but soon afterwards in Europe as well. Methods in sociolinguistics. The roots of sociolinguistics are to be found in traditional dialectology. The common denominator between the two disciplines is their concerned with language variation, the one with that on a social level and the other with geographically determined variation. However, many aspects of dialectological research are unacceptable to modern social linguists. The chief deficiency of dialect investigation in the 19th century and early 20th century is that they were unrepresentative. That is, their informants consisted of a skewed selection of speakers, older, male, rural, non-mobile speakers were given preference as informants because many dialectologists were trained as historical linguists. They were frequently concerned with discovering the most archaic forms of language still spoken at their time, often on the assumption that the older forms were somehow more genuine. The kind of speakers just alluded to were regarded as those who would speak the most conservative, hence most genuine form of a language at any given time. This standpoint is quite different from that of present-day social linguistics. Language used in society applies to all groups, young and old, male and female, rural and urban, indeed, because the majority of inhabitants of Western countries now live in cities because such concentration of people tend to induce high amounts of language variation. Social linguists are more often than not concerned with language used in cities in order to realize impartial investigations of language in society. It is necessary to employ objective methods. Care must be taken that the choice of information be random and thus not subject to the possible bias of the field worker or linguist. Furthermore, consciously interviewing informants often has the disadvantage that the field worker has a standardizing effect on informants' use of language. A dialogue situation in which informants are not aware of their status as informants is much more favorable and less likely to distort the results. Various techniques have been developed here. For instance, getting information to talk about emotional matters generally draws their attention away from their use of language, and hence furthers a more natural style, what linguists call a vernacular style. Principles of modern social linguistics. What are the principles of the modern social linguistics? One is the prior definition of one area of investigation, the impartial choice of informants, the use of preferred methods of investigation. For example, take recording rather than questionnaire aligned for later control. Where possible, the anonymous collection of data, new methods had to be evolved in order to get reliable data. It is impossible to investigate a whole community because of size and complexity. However, to get a representative description of what is typical of the speech of a city or region, all members of community must have an equal chance of being selected for a survey. Consequently, individuals are selected at random from the total population. Because dialectology was associated with the study of conservative form of language, social linguists do not always use the term dialect. The more neutral term variety is often chosen because of the advantage that it does not imply contrast with the standard. The development of social linguistics. The development of social linguistics is bound up with the activity of the American and British linguists since the early 1960s. First and foremost of these is William Labo, who in a pioneering investigation of English of New York City published in 1966 arrived at many new conclusions concerning language variation and language change. Labo stressed that structural systems of the present and changes in language of the past can be investigated in relation to each other. Language change can be observed in progress with present-day language varieties, and the fact that so-called free variation was not in fact free at all but determined by deliberate, if not conscious, choices by speakers. Labo further stressed the need to collect data reliably. The linguist must be aware that information will show up features in their speech when is style shifting. During an interview, varying degree of attention, that is, some speakers pay great attention to their speech, so-called audio monitoring in casual speech, the attention paid is less. Thirdly, degree of formality determined by the nature of the interview. This can vary depending on the way informants get to the interviewers and the situations they are placed in. The difficulty referred to above, namely that people's linguistic behavior changes while being recorded, has been dubbed the observer's paradox by Labo. His answer to this problem was to develop the rapid and anonymous interview in which informants were not aware they were being interviewed by a linguist. The essence of this technique can be seen by considering how Labo collected data on English in New York City. To begin with, one should say that he was interested in the linguistic variables. One is the presence or absence of syllable final R. Number two is the pronunciation of the fricative 2 and 3 and C, the quality of various vowels. He chose two words in which the sound occurred, namely fourth floor and then went around to a number of department stores in New York. Each of these was typical of a certain social class, on the assumption that employees use the pronunciation which holds for their typical customers. He could then examine the kind of English used in each store to get samples without people knowing that they were acting as informants for a linguist lab checked in advance that items were for sale on the fourth floor and then asked the store employee where he could find these items. After the individual responded on the fourth floor, he asked again, pretending that he did not hear the first time. This supplied him with a means of gaining this supplies him with a more careful pronunciation of the two words. Lagos saw this technique a means of gaining genuine pronunciation which were not spoiled by speaker's awareness of providing data for an investigating linguist. Of course, there are disadvantages to this method. Above all, the small quantity of data which can be gleaned at any one time and the inability to do a sound recording which one could listen to afterwards. Social linguist data, whereas traditional dialectology focused on the relationship between language and geography. Urban dialectology is more concerned with the relationship between language and social factors. Furthermore, the methods of traditional dialectology differ from those of urban dialectology in terms of selection of informants. The data of traditional dialectology was often obtained by asking informants to fill in questionnaires consisting of question forwards used in a rural setting. Very often the outcome of this method consisted of one word answer. Since social linguistics is more interested in phonology and grammar rather than in vocabulary, the methods of eliciting data have to ensure stages of free spoken speech which are suitable for evaluation. Depending on the size of the survey and all its objectives, the number of informants and thus the amount of data might be varied. Where large amounts of data are involved, informants must be classified along various lines. With urban groupings, traditional divisions of class may not always be suitable. At the very least, the basis for these divisions must be made explicit. For that reason, linguists often categorize speakers by factors such as occupation, income, education and housing, quite apart from age and gender. Social linguistics and language change. When a system is dynamic and shows movement, there is change. This division applies to language as much as it does to any other area during the heyday of historical linguistics in the 19th century. Change which had taken place over the centuries was described in great detail. However, the mechanisms of language change were only partially considered. Only internal change in sound systems and grammar were investigated. But the large area of externally motivated change determined by currents in society was never given its due recognition. With the advent of social linguistics, the process of language change became the subject of close scrutiny. Social linguists maintain that the minute shifts in language use which can be observed in contemporary societies. Societies are in accumulation, no different from the large-scale changes observed over centuries. In particular, William Labo concerned himself with the process and stages of language change. Here we recognize three phases which can be summarized. One is origin, a period in which alternative variants for established variants beginning to appear. Two is propagation, the stage at which the new variants establish themselves to the detriment of the older ones, which are sidelined. Three is conclusion, the stages at which the many variants are replaced completely by new variants, remain as residue after the change has terminated. Various external factors can accelerate the process of language change. Above all, social pressure from above or below. Additional factors are the degree of literacy in community, the restraining influence of a standard of a language, the relative prestige of speakers favoring new form literature. The course of language change shows a typical rate which involves a slow beginning, a relatively rapid middle section, and a deceleration towards the end. Schematically, these three phases correspond to the beginning, middle, and end of an S-curve, which is frequently used as a visualization of language change, social networks. James and Leslie Milrow began investigating language use in Belfast in 1970s and continued for over a decade. At the center of the Milrow's work is the notion of social network adopted from work on sociology. All speakers have a place in the network of their social environment. This network consists of ties of varying strength. Depending on the social bond speakers entertain within their neighborhood. There is a general assumption that for those on the lower end of the socio-economic scale, the ties are stronger than for those further up this scale. Networks can be defined by how dense and multiplex they are. For instance, if a speaker A not only knows other speakers B, C, D, E, etc., but the latter also know each other, then the network is dense. If the individuals is new are more isolated and not mutual dependencies, then it shows low density. A network is multiplex if its members interact in more than one day. For example, if members have a number of work colleagues in their network with whom they also spend their spare time through communal neighborhood activities or sports, for example, then the network is multiplex because there is more than one factor uniting members. A fixed and bound network can impose rigid linguistic norms on its members, which in turn require a defining character, albeit an unconscious one, for the network itself. Such networks tend to be impervious to influence from outside, especially from the prestigious norms of society of which they are part. Speakers who engage in loose-knit networks, such as the suburban middle classes are relatively more accessible to language norms. Because loose networks do not show clear defining features, they speaker, these speakers adopt the norms of the socially prestigious standard. Conversely, working class sections of society, those with strong networks, do not see middle class speech as a model because they have their own linguistic norms from within their network. Certain generalizations about network can be made. The relative strength of a network depends on the weight accorded by speakers to two conflicting forces in society. Status and solidarity. If speakers opt for status, then they are likely to have weak ties to try to move upwards on a social scale, striving to achieve professional status and economic success. Should speakers opt for solidarity, then they generally remain in their surroundings, maintaining ties with neighbors and participating in the life of the community. Solidarity is an aspect of social behavior which has a linguistic component. Speakers who demonstrate solidarity exhibit allegiance to the vernacular norms of their neighborhood, frequently in contradiction to those of the socially prestigious forms of language. The linguistic forms of a community are local, whereas status features are diffuse and point for a much wider area, typically for an entire country. The number of defining features of low status, high solidarity techniques variety is usually quite high. The linguistic norms of such communities can be difficult, if not impossible, for non-natives to acquire the identity function. The identity function of high solidarity variety implies that one can exclude those who are not native to the community. Hence, multiple network ties seem furthermore to hold especially for young males, women and middle-aged speakers in general tend to opt more for status and to turn down the linguistic sign of strong network ties. A network is much smaller than a class, which is a general characterization of social status, whereas a network is an aerial reality, typically a part of a city. There is, of course, a correlation to class in as much as people in network usually belong to a single socio-economic group, and those in the strongest networks tend to be lowest on this scale. Given their relatively small scale, networks form a consensus-based micro level within society. The bonding within a class is achieved through similarity in socio-political outlook and not by identification with a certain locale. The Belfast investigation, the insights into socialist behavior just scarce were gained by a close study of the following three areas of Belfast. One is Delhi, Maghreb, Protestant, East Belfast. We have a Lower Shankill Road, Protestant, West Central Belfast. Clonard, Lower Falls Road, Catholic, West Central Belfast. The three areas are different in the social importance they attach to certain features. For instance, the palatalization of G as in cab, gab is generally regarded as a rural feature of Ulster English, and in Belfast is found mosque with order made 40 to 55, chiefly in Catholic West Belfast in the eastern section of the city, which has had a largely Worcester Scots input from North York, down where the palatalization is not an indigenous feature. This trend is avoided as can be seen from its sensual representation in the data collected by the Milways. Types of speech communities. When linguists talk about the people who use language, they refer to speech communities. Lay people tend much more to refer to countries when talking about such groups. Certainly, in the Western world, countries are strongly associated with single language and vice versa. Linguists can this as due to the rise of nation states in the past few centuries, where single languages attained official status in individual countries. English in the United Kingdom, French in France, Italian in Italy, etc. However, beneficial official status of one language may be for a modern country in terms of government, public discourse, higher education, etc. It is not helpful to other languages which may be found within the borders of a particular country. Furthermore, even in countries where only one language is spoken by nearly everybody, say Dutch in the Netherlands, there may well be different dialects of this language which themselves stand in certain relationship to the standard of that country. Even within Europe and most certainly outside of it, the equation of one country with one language breaks down. Switzerland is a good example of a country where a single national identity exists across three major and one minor speech community: Swiss, German, French, Italian, and Rhaeto-Romance. Beyond Europe, it is more the rule than the exception for countries to have several languages within their borders. One need only think of such countries as India and China or Siberian Russia to see how many languages can be integrated into a single state. In such instances, there is of course an official language which serves the function of a lingua franca, that is, a language which is used as a means of communication among those groups who do not speak each other's language. A subset of bilingual countries can be recognized in those regions of the world where former European colonial powers were once to be found. Many such countries have conferred official status on the European language they have been exposed to, with the language of their native people having a precarious status. This is true for all South America, with the exception of Paraguay. Spanish or Portuguese in Brazil has official status, and local languages are spoken to varying degree, particularly in rural communities. Some countries have been fairly successful in reconciling the status of the colonial language with that of local languages. In India, English is a lingua franca, but indigenous languages, primarily Hindi, but many others as well, have large numbers of speakers and are used in all spheres of society. Still, other countries have had mixed colonial background and various European languages may or may not survive from earlier periods. Cameroon was subject to British and French rule, even German rule briefly. Both English and French are spoken in present-day Cameroon. South Africa has maintained both the English and Dutch legacies with forms of English and Afrikaans, a former of early colonial Dutch being spoken by large numbers alongside many indigenous languages in the Philippines. Spanish was more and less outstayed by English from America at the end of the 19th and in the early 20th century. In the past 50 years of so form of the major indigenous language, Tagalog have asserted themselves above all around the capital Manila. Occasionally, the role of lingua franca can be played by a non-European language. In large stretches of East Africa, the Bantu language influenced in its vocabulary by Arabic served as a general means of communication, for instance in Kenya and Tanzania. Diglossia, this is a type of situation in which there is a division between two languages or two varieties of a language such that one variety, the so-called high or H variety, is used in public life, in addresses, in the media, in schools and universities, etc. And another variety, the so-called low variety or L variety, is used in domestic life with family and friends. Examples of diglostic situation are to be found in Switzerland, in Greece with the literary form of the language Catrus and the colloquial form Demotiki in various Arabian countries. Bilingualism, a type of linguistic situation in which two languages coexist in a country are bilingualism, a type of linguistic situation in which two languages coexist in a country or language community without there being a notable distribution according to function of social class. Within Europe, Belgium, in those parts where French and Flemish are spoken side by side, provides an example of bilingualism. Finland in the area of Helsinki with Finnish and Swedish is a further example. In North America, Canada with English and Quebec French is another example. Not all countries offer official recognition to the languages spoken within its border. France has not accorded Britain the same status as French. Turkey does not recognize Kurdish as an official language. In discussions of bilingualism, it is normal to distinguish societal bilingualism and individual bilingualism. Naturally, a bilingual society consists of bilingual individuals, but such a society is not necessary for many bilinguals who speak two languages almost equally and do not show a functional distribution of the languages. Bilinguals often illustrate a feature which can contribute over time to language change. This is what is called chord switching, which occurs when speakers move from one language to another and back again within the same sentence. For example, J, I, Mang, the John, outtakes and later I always add. In England, there are many speculations about why this takes place. For example, speakers have first become acquainted with some phenomena in the second language and switch to it when talking about it, or maybe they switch because they just feel the second language is momentarily more appropriate. This, the switching may involve single words or whole clauses the wants to play cricket. Incredible, but it is true. She wants to play cricket, unbelievable. The later type is governed by strict rules about what point in a sentence can act as a pilot for the switchover. If chord switching is widespread in a community and become socially accepted, then it may lead in the fullness of time to changes in the original language, just as borrowing or subtle transfer has done. Minority languages, this is reference to languages which are spoken by small numbers of people within the borders of a country which has another language spoken by the majority. Irish is a minority language in Ireland. We have two romances in Switzerland and in Sami in Finland. In all these species, the languages have official status. Sorbian is a minority language in German. In Germany, though without official status, it is spoken by a dwindling number of speakers. A minority language in one country a minority language in one country may be a national language in another. For example, Danish in northern Germany is spoken by a small minority, as in Turkish in Bulgaria, or Swedish in Finland. Within the European Union, a degree of official status is accorded to languages which the European administration recognizes as living languages irrespective of numbers or of status in the host country. Some minority languages are spread across more than one country without having official status in any, though there are varying degrees of recognition. Basque, for instance, is found in both northeast Spain and southwest France. Kurdish is spread across a number of countries: Turkey, Armenia, Syria, Iraq, and Iran, to maintain the main ones. Although the Kurdish cultural region has over 25 million speakers of Kurdish, about half of whom live in Turkey, the language does not have official status. Language split, this term is used to refer to the type of situation which obtains when, for political reasons, two varieties of a language which are scarcely distinguishable are forcibly differentiated to maximize difference between two countries. This applies to the Moldavian dialect of Romanian, which is now written in Cyrillic and is the language of the Republic of Moldavia, and the remaining dialects of Romanian. It also applies to Hindi, the official language of India, alongside English and Urdu, the official language of Pakistan. In this situation, much use is made of different writing systems. Thus, Hindi is written from left to right in the Devanagari script, while Urdu, the language of Muslim country, is written right to left in the Persian variant of Arabic. Once language split has been introduced, the differences may become real with time. For example, with Hindi and Urdu, the different allegiance make for different vocabulary, which helps the originality which helps the originally artificial distinction between the language to become real. So it is all about the Indian and foreign languages. Today up to this we have heard. Thank you all my brothers and sisters, ladies and gentlemen, students, scholar, teacher, trainer, professor, professional, all my dear friends. Let us go to what is happening in India, what changes we see. Let us go through. विदेश भेजने पर लाखों की धोखाधड़ी